Am I doing the 3, 2, 1 or? Okay, sorry. All right, 3, 2, 1. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the Women's Project tonight for a panel on honoring the legacy of RBG, what you can do where you are. The Women's Project is a statewide organization dedicated to building a strong movement that harnesses the power of art, activism, and advocacy. They believe that together we can dismantle systems of oppression and uplift the voices of people in our communities throughout Rhode Island in order to shift power and shape the policies that impact our lives and the lives of our neighbors. They commit to embodying the principles of reproductive justice, cultivating innovation, and advancing real and lasting change. My name is Vimala Phongsavanh. I'm the organizing director at the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center in Washington, D.C. I, however, am currently based in the great city of Woonsocket, Rhode Island. The CPC Center works to identify and develop solutions to build a more just, equitable, and resilient nation. Our network approach brings together community leaders, organizers, advocates, unions, and policy experts to build people-led, cutting-edge policy. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a champion of reproductive health, rights, and justice. She also inspired millions of women and girls and our male and gender nonconforming accomplices to dream big and work to make a change. As Republicans refuse to honor RBG's dying wishes, and October 26, for a vote to confirm Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, we are taking a moment to talk about what it looks like to honor her legacy. We know that the issues that shape all of our lives hang in the balance, no matter where we live or what we look like. An extremist Supreme Court means taking healthcare away from millions of young people and people with pre-existing conditions in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. It means destroying working people's right to join together in union. There's simply too much at stake to let extremist politicians and wealthy corporations hijack the Supreme Court. We, the people, Black, white, brown, and Indigenous, understand that democracy means we get a say in our government. We can't let the same politicians who delayed relief for our families for months and months rush through a nomination before the next government is inaugurated without being held accountable. When we join together, we can make sure that all 3 branches of government serve the people, not just the wealthy few. Tonight, we are joined by an incredible group of panelists. We have Marcela Betancur from the Latino Policy Institute, Julie Burkhart from Trust Women, Morgan Harper, a former candidate for Congress and activist and attorney, and Karen Middleton from Cobalt. These incredible women are making a difference in their communities. We hope that tonight you can learn more about how you can help to make RBG's memory a revolution and push for positive change. I'm excited to introduce our first speaker for the night, Morgan Harper. Morgan is a lawyer and most recently was a grassroots candidate to represent Ohio's 3rd Congressional District in Columbus, Ohio. Previously, she was a vice president at Local Initiative Support Corporation.
Okay. Well, I could just start talking. Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. So I know we're having some technical difficulties there, but I think the first prompt was for me to just talk a little bit about what the past year has been like and running for Congress and how I got to that place. And so it's a kind of a long story that I'll tell briefly, but you know, as a kid here in Columbus, where I ran and where I live, you know, I kind of got exposed to the economic injustice thing pretty early on. And I thought, you know, through policy and understanding the systems, we would be able to do something about that. And one of the learnings that I had from my time in Washington is we actually have a pretty firm understanding of what would address economic injustice, but the political will to do something about implementing those policies and having the political leadership that's willing to take those types of perceived risks is what has been a big barrier. And so you know, I decided to run for Congress for that reason as a grassroots candidate, saying I'm not taking any corporate money. I want to be free to fight for what our community needs. And I don't think Columbus is unique. I think especially right now in the Corona era, we're seeing, one, just how connected all of us are and our vulnerability, but also how tenuous any security that we have been fortunate to attain can be with, you know, any type of shock. And so our campaign really was focused on those themes and was about empowering people to engage in the political system and hold leaders accountable and elect a different type of political leader. So that was the campaign. I didn't win, and so I should say to not bury the lead, but the work continues, and I think that's been one of the coolest things in a way. After running, you never know quite what will happen, but just continuing to connect with a lot of people who that message resonated with even before the pandemic, but especially post-pandemic. And I've heard from those people like, Morgan, I went to one of your events, I heard what you're talking about. It didn't really make sense for me. But then when you have, a job shock and so many people losing healthcare when it's tied to employers, folks start to think more creatively about the healthcare system, for example. So, it was a really incredible experience running. Encourage anybody to run, and the journey definitely continues.
Thanks, Morgan. In my work, we get to work in close partnership with members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, labor unions, movement organizations, and think tanks to build stronger cohesion and infrastructure for the progressive movement. For a moment, let's think about if we had it all. Let's say the Democrats take the House, the Senate, and the presidency. What should progressives push for in the first 100 days of a potential new administration or Congress?
Yeah, this is a big question because there's going to be, hopefully, so much cleanup to do from the dismantling of the federal government that's occurred over the past 4 years. Take, for example, the agency where I used to work, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There's been a very clear plan to make sure that agency does not do anything. And so we're going to have to survey and understand what's the lay of the land. But, for Congress and for the administration specifically in terms of an affirmative agenda, I think there's some really clear priorities. One, economy, economic recovery. Even though the president and other folks, I certainly have a lot of Republicans on the ground here in Ohio, for example, that love to say oh, the 401ks are booming, we're all good. And it's not quite when, only 20 to 30% of people have 401ks in the first place. And I think the number came out today that 8 million people have moved into poverty since the pandemic started. So coming up with solutions that are going to lead to a more equitable recovery, unlike, some of the weaknesses that a lot of folks are now understanding in the CARES Act, I think are going to be really important. Climate, and luckily, I do think climate can connect to the job situation. This has been one of the encouraging things from the plans that Biden has put out so far. And even, for those of us who maybe wasn't our top choice, perfect progressive candidate on the issue of climate, looking at really big investments there that also will create, more long-term job opportunities for people, I think is promising. And then I have to also highlight the structural changes to the economy that I think are going to be necessary in order to broaden economic opportunity. I work with an organization called American Economic Liberties Project, focused on antitrust. There's a big report that just came out of the antitrust subcommittee, and that's talking about the consolidated corporate power in the tech industry, but really it's every industry at this point. And until we start enforcing our antitrust laws and allowing small businesses and consumers to have a fair place in the market, I don't think we're gonna be able to solve for a lot of the other issues. And then healthcare, I think, is another big one, again, related to the pandemic. I really believe that we've got to get to universal health care, and I hope that that'll be a priority as well.
Thanks, Morgan. And just last question for this round, how will we honor the legacy of RBG?
Yeah, there's I think, well, one, the session seems to me to be already a way that we're living her vision. I think for me personally, one of the things I take away from her is, as a woman, and as a person who cares about our country, looking at a reality that women were facing where we didn't have equal rights, and saying, I'm not going to accept that. And in fact, I'm going to dismantle that and create more equality. And so that's a lesson that I take with me for sure as a woman in politics, in law, and just living in the US. but then also wanting to empower other women to have that spirit of fearlessness and a willingness to take on big, big challenges and give it everything you've got. And I really, one of the organizations I work with here in Ohio that sounds kind of similar actually to the Women Project is Ohio Women's Alliance, all about building up grassroots leaders, women of color across the state, and recognizing that we have the power, and when we come together and use it, we can do incredible things. So I think that's going to be, one of the biggest learnings that we have from RBG's legacy, and I hope that we continue to build together.
Thank you, Morgan. I'm excited to announce our next speaker, Julie Burkhart. Julie is the founder and CEO of Trust Women, a direct service and advocacy organization dedicated to opening clinics that provide abortion care in underserved communities across the nation. She has been at the front lines of the reproductive justice movement for over 3 decades, engaging in legislative and political work on behalf of physicians and constituents. Ms. Burkhart worked side by side with Dr. George Tiller for 7 years until his assassination. In 2013, she reestablished abortion services in Wichita, Kansas, and in Dr. Tiller's former clinic, now the flagship clinic for Trust Women. Trust Women has clinics in Wichita and Oklahoma City. Julie, thanks for joining us. Tell me how you've been doing this last year.
There we go. I'll just unmute myself. Good evening, Vimala. Thank you so much. Yeah, I was thinking about that question, and I think this year maybe the best word is it feels like a yo-yo effect. Just a lot of ups and downs. But we have been persevering, but certainly we've had our trials and tribulations. And I'd be happy to share some of those if you'd like to hear how we've navigated those.
Yeah, if you don't mind sharing.
No, not at all. This, I think this year, and particularly going back to March, April, May, those 3 months of this year at the height of the pandemic, as we experienced it in the center of the country, it not only taught us how to navigate through a horrible, public health care crisis, but it also gave us more of a look through a window into a post-Roe world, and which was quite frightening. So, first of all, we had to go about figuring out how we were going to keep staff safe, patients, physicians safe, how we were going to work with our physicians to help them travel, something as basic as hopping on an airplane and flying from their home state to one of our clinics in Kansas or Oklahoma and providing care. And so, we had to figure out where we were going to get adequate PPE for everyone. Then came the abortion bans, where the governors in certain states deemed abortion care as non-essential health care. First, for us, it came with Governor Abbott from Texas, his proclamation in his executive order that abortion is non-essential, and banned that. And then just a few days later, Governor Stitt, our governor in Oklahoma, also deemed abortion as non-essential. There were some other states around us that toyed with abortion access as well. So what we saw in that week of March 24th, we saw people coming up to Oklahoma, more specifically from Texas, to access abortion care. And then by that Friday, the Oklahoma governor had banned abortion. So then we saw everyone coming up to Kansas. And don't get me wrong, people were going to other states such as Georgia and Arizona and Illinois. But we saw at our Wichita, Kansas clinic a 400% increase in our patient load. It was something that I hope I never witness again in my lifetime. We were seeing people as far away as Houston, Texas, which if you look it up on maps, it's a 9-hour drive one way. People were being put out onto the roadways with their loved ones or without, because they couldn't bring their families with them. Maybe they were looking for transportation because they didn't have transportation to drive all the way to Wichita, Kansas, or money for a hotel room. So this was a point in time that lasted for several weeks, where literally people were calling calling us in the clinic, just frantic, terrified, not sure how they were going to access their services. So that was one, there were some big lessons learned at the beginning of the year. And what we see in the middle of the country, where people already have to navigate a lot of punitive laws when it comes to reproductive rights and their health care, people were, driven further away from access to that health care. So that's one thing that the pandemic taught us, and these executive orders that were put into force by the governors of Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Julie. A lot of my friends from different parts of the country like to remind me of like having blue state privilege, which includes being able to get access to a safe abortion without having to travel almost thousands of miles. And it seems like we are seeing what a Amy Coney Barrett world is going to look like. And so what work is Trust Women doing to be, with the clinics, but like what can other people do to help from around the country to just get folks to have safe access to abortion?
Well, I'm quite concerned about the appointment of Amy Coney Barrett and what that means for us nationally when it comes to not only access to abortion, but other rights that people are entitled to in this country. We have put a lot into our states, and I will say more into Kansas than into Oklahoma at this point. And I think you can really see our activism and in coalition with other people as well. So we haven't done this in any sort of vacuum or siloed effect here. But in what we have done is, we have lobbying, we have lobbyists. So we're incredibly active in the state capitals. We really lean into abortion and litigate where it makes sense for us. And we have a couple of cases right now. But I think where, people can really engage who aren't necessarily in these states that are more politically hostile is we have door-to-door canvassing that we engage in. Now I will say that we did not engage in that during 2020 because of the pandemic, which I'm gravely disappointed because that's one of our projects and programs that I'm really proud of. But we've switched over to doing a lot of digital advertising and also grassroots communications and organizing via text message and phone calls. And so that's a way that people can engage in politically hostile states without necessarily being in the states, and really lend a voice to helping constituents who are living in these environments to help build up their political power and knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. Last question for you. How will you honor RBG's legacy?
Well, we will continue to lean into abortion, and we will continue to organize constituents. At this time we have a robust Get Out the Vote program in both states to help choice voters understand the importance of going to the polls this election cycle. You know, we're eager to expand access and to put down services in another state that is underserved. And so I think what's important, that even though we live in this even more politically hostile time, which I wasn't sure I would see it become even more hostile, but it has, is that we have to keep leaning into our values, and we have to keep working to activate, educate, and ignite people who can also build with us. So that's our commitment as Trust Women to people.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
I'm excited to introduce our next speaker for the night, Karen Middleton. Karen serves as the president of Cobalt, formerly NARAL, Colorado, advancing abortion access and reproductive rights. Cobalt is a statewide member-driven political organization and key partner in the reproductive rights movement in Colorado. Karen, same question that we've been asking. How has your year been?
You know, it's been an adventurous year. So, you know, so Colorado was the first state to decriminalize abortion in 1967. And that same year, our organization was originally founded as a Colorado-based organization. So a lot of people don't realize that we were the first in the country to decriminalize pre-Roe. And we returned to our Colorado roots and left NARAL in January, and we thought that was our big cliff dive. And then we had COVID. So when I started the year, I really saw three big threats. And our work is not just as advocates, but we also, one, we launched a regional abortion alliance. So we have 12 states that work together. Julie and I work together closely. So the 12 states out here that go north to Montana, south to Texas, we've got Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Kansas, Wyoming, Montana. We're kind of a hodgepodge of states that are knitting together across lines between abortion funds, people who provide abortions, and the organizations like ours working in health rights and justice. So we started that because we feared the future of the Supreme Court, and we started the year worrying about the threat of the Supreme Court. June v. Medical Services was the latest assault, and we weren't sure what was happening. We saw the continued rollbacks by the federal administration, everything from, you know, enforcing the domestic gag rule to further rollbacks around other areas of reproductive health care, and then just the shameless attacks around ICE in detention and women in detention, which has continued, and young people, that has continued through the atrocities we're seeing. So we were worried about all of that, really not realizing we were going to see the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which brings all of it closer to home. Now, I will share that similar to what Julie saw in Kansas, as an abortion fund, and we work with anyone who comes to Colorado, and we're one of 7 states that provide abortion later in pregnancy. So we have no restrictions on when you can access an abortion. So we already have people who come from around the country and often from around the world. And so when everything shut down, we saw, we just had a lot of really traumatic stories of people driving, as Julie talked about. They were driving here from Texas with a family. Abortion procedures for abortion later in pregnancy, you're often here for a few days. So they were in a hotel where there was no restaurant and no grocery store access. So our staff were actually volunteering and delivering groceries, having meals sent in, making sure that there were gas cards and other things, and that we were able to lift some of that up in the media. So we were really trying to make sure people knew what was happening. But I feel like this year, everything went faster, more dangerous, and more urgent than we had expected. And then on top of all that, while we were in lockdown, for the 4th time since 2008, we have an anti-abortion ballot measure that is trying to ban abortion at 22 weeks. We'd had a nice 6-year break, and they did not have the signatures. We did not think they had any chance in getting on the ballot. And they were delayed a month between when the ballots cured and when they were told they could go try to make up that gap. They had 4 weeks to organize. and they emerged with 50,000 signatures in a 10 or 15-day period. I mean, I couldn't pay someone to do that. So it was a really, it was an unexpected attack, but please know that they're trying to attack us because we provide abortion care for states that don't have it. We have women and pregnant people flying from all parts of the country, and so they're trying to cut off that access point. It is a neck and neck campaign. Proposition 115, public polling is showing us really within just a few points. So it kind of just kept going from bad to worse as the year went, but it's been an adventure. I will say we are ready to fight, we're standing strong, and we are taking this all the way to election day, and we believe we will ultimately defeat them, but it is a razor thin fight right now.
Yeah, and good luck with that fight. Got a couple more weeks left. And so how can folks from around the country support the work that you're doing in Colorado?
So immediately around the campaign, voteno115.com, people can sign up and phone bank from anywhere. We use this very slick system that makes it super easy. So we're text banking and phone banking. So if people want to volunteer an hour or two from anywhere, you are welcome to sign on and join us. We have a very public endorsements process. So we've had organizations from across the country support us. We work very closely, for example, with the Bridget Alliance based out of New York, and Fun Texas Choice and other groups that we help with. So I would say if you have any time at all to lend, that would be great. And I think year round, we're always looking for support for our abortion fund. Any money given to the fund, 100% stays with the fund. It's a no questions asked, no income requirements fund. And we will, and we are additionally providing practical support. We actually staff our fund out of the foundation. So no administrative overhead is tied to the abortion fund itself, which is really a model that we're able to do because we're a little bit bigger organization, and we're really excited to be able to do that. But you know, it's always time, people, and money. So we're happy to work with people in any way that they can meet us.
Thank you, Karen. And last question for you, how will you honor RBG's legacy?
Before I do that, I'm going to say I hail from Massachusetts. So I just want to say I really appreciate working with you tonight with Rhode Island. So I feel some kindred spirit. Here's what I did. I think it's personal and political. So first of all, I spent, well, we're all trapped at home, right? So I spent several months painting through the summer and fall, nothing artistic, but walls and ceilings, listening to RBG's My Own Words. And I really recommend that to you because I don't know about you, but I think if we don't remember our history, we are doomed to repeat it. And I had just spent, you know, those couple of months listening to, and much of it is her voice if you listen to it on Audible. So I was hearing her speeches, and I think we always have to go back and see what kind of work has been done, so we're not repeating it, and take away some of those lessons. So that's one thing I did. The other thing I did is we have to just mourn. I was thinking about this morning. I will always know where I was when I heard that she had passed away. And I think that will be our moment. I know we've heard of famous men in the past that everyone remembers. I think RBG will go down as we will all know where we were that evening, and carry that with us for our lifetime. And then something I did just to kind of heal, and I'm going to share it with you. I'm into crafts, so I'm trapped at home. And so I made little Rbg tribute candles using clips from the fabulous internet and printing it out and making people whole. And I've been giving them as gifts to my staff and kind of just gifting them. But, you know, thinking about how she impacted you personally, thinking about how she impacted our movements in the collective, and not forgetting what she's done as we move forward, particularly in these dark times. So I wanted to share that with you, and thank you for having me tonight.
Oh, thank you, and love the New England connection. I always love a good like Boston or Massachusetts, Rhode Island relationship. And you're right, I do remember exactly where I was. I was on a Zoom call, but you know, I will always remember that. Thank you. So thank you, Karen. And last but not least, I'm honored to introduce our last speaker of the night, Marcela Betancur. Marcela is the director of the Latino Policy Institute, an organization that works to examine and communicate the evolving experience of Latinos in Rhode Island. Marcela's professional career has focused in affordable housing, civil liberties, and a wide range of policy work around education and economic equity for underserved communities. And I will fully disclose that Marcella and I are friends, and really excited to be able to ask you some questions tonight, Marcella.
I'm very
Same
excited.
with everyone else.
Asking me questions.
Same with everyone else. How have you been doing this year?
I've been okay. So as I'm hearing all of you, I'm like, oh my God, they've been at such good work. And to be very honest, I think as for many, it's been a weird, strange year into identifying and really realizing who you are as a professional, as a person, as a X, whatever identities you are. And this year for me, as I'm sure for many, it was a very difficult year to deal with work, especially so. As Vimala mentioned, I work in an organization that we focus on the Latino community. So for those of you who are not too familiar with Rhode Island, well, we're a very small state. 16% of our population is Latinos, and we have Latinos from all Latin America, different generations. And so by mid-April, what we started hearing was that 45 to 47% of infection rates were from Latinos. And this is the same trends that we're seeing in other parts of the country, where the Black community was infected at higher rates, and Latinos were as well. They were dying at higher rates. And so I think just a month into quarantine, it became this really difficult thing of how am I going to serve my community and my organization the best way possible? And I think it was really difficult. And I had reporters calling and saying like, hey, so why are Latinos being affected more? And a part of me was like, what are you talking about? Like, because like, have you seen that we're poor? Have you seen where you make us live? Have you seen that you don't provide for us healthcare? And so these very basic things that it wasn't until I had reporters calling and like people at the governor's office saying, why is this happening? That we were able to say, because of policies that you've all created and that you've maintained on purpose, because it is for your benefit, and I say your, like the government and the world, to keep people poor and to keep people of color and underserved communities where they are. And so it was a really difficult time to kind of pivot to what, where our best place was. So we have focused on connecting with organizations who are on the ground. Our work focuses mostly on research and information and advocacy, but so we connected with a lot of organizations that do direct service so that we could better provide translated services as well as any information that we could. We participated in informational conversations with the governor about what to do and what needed to be done. And then recently we actually put a Latino impact plan out, which is a pretty big document in which we say, when it comes to health, economic equity, and education, these are the things that you should have done a long time ago and that you need to do in the next 12 to 24 months. And I think as I keep talking about the report that came out last week, I keep realizing and hearing all of you is for a lot of communities, the plan, can really be implemented and should be implemented in other places. And what I keep saying is this is not going to get any better in the next 12 months. It's going to get worse. And if we do not put something in work today, then a lot of our communities who have been underserved are going to just continue to be so.
Thanks, Marcella. One of my favorite parts about working in Rhode Island was being able to banter back and forth with you at the State House, to imagine another world that is possible, and then also to complain about all the forces of power that prevent another world from being possible. I noticed that after the 2016 election, presidential election, much more people began to care about the power of the Speaker of the House in Rhode Island. We saw more people show up at hearings about rules, and elected officials standing up against the status quo. And just a little over a month ago, we saw a real progressive wave in the Rhode Island primaries. As someone who spends a lot of time up at the State House and seeing what you've seen, what should this new class of progressives demand? What should their top priorities be in the first 100 days, and how do they get there?
Yeah, it's amazing to see how in just 4 years, we've become a lot more used to having, what I would call a regular human going into the State House. And it's really powerful. And so I think what, this new wave of progressives, but more, yes, I'm going to keep them. But most importantly, those incumbents who have been there, they need to know that they need to listen to people and understand that the world has been shifting. Not it's shifting today, it has been shifting for generations, and they need to keep up. The reason that so many incumbents that had been there for a long time, and some of them were decent, you know, not too terrible, but were crushed by new progressive young people, mostly women of color, is because they weren't doing anything. They were keeping up the status quo. So I think for this new wave of progressives, they need to band together. I think that's one thing that happens in local politics. And I'm sure that it happens in the national sphere as well. But in local politics, we get there and then we just start, the power structures start to kind of like pull us apart. And that, you know, we saw that in 2018 when there was a new kind of small wave of progressives in the state house. But this year they need to band together because they have enough numbers to demand that we pass a dope budget, that we pass a budget that cares about people, that we pass a budget that does not defund our school districts, which they are going to be. There's reports right now of child care services being defunded, like over $2 million in our state being defunded for child care services in a pandemic. And so they have the numbers in both the Senate and in the House to be able to demand things and to stick together. But I think more importantly, and what so many of these candidates have done, is to engage the community in a way that is accessible. And I think that is something of like, you know, the good old boys club hasn't done because they don't care. And so this new wave needs to continue to do that so they can have the community support.
Yeah, and you know, I think with this new progressive wave, and also just I think Morgan, you mentioned earlier, needing a just and equitable recovery, right? Rhode Island is actually one of the first states to always go into recession and the last one out. And so an anti-austerity budget is really important that really centers communities of color and underserved communities. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Marcella. And last question, how will you honor RBG's legacy?
So I think the best way to try to honor her is which this is as a first generation like Latina is actually a really difficult thing, is to believe in myself that, you know, that the biggest barriers that I have to get forward, like to get through something, is myself. I think the couple of days after she passed, I watched her documentary again, even though I was like with wine and a lot of tears. But it was amazing to me that I'm decently young. I'm 31, and I tell myself that there's all these things I can't do anymore because I'm too old. And this woman was able to have children and all this stuff while going to law school and do all these amazing things. But more importantly, not only does she encourage others to do great things, but she continued to encourage herself, and she found a partner that could do that for her as well. And so I think, at least I take it very personally, that question is to you know, continue her legacy, is to be the best kind of like cheerleader I can for myself, so that in that way I can be the best cheerleader for others.
Thanks, Marcella. And I'll cheerlead you on the whole time if you need it as well. So that kind of wraps up one portion. I'm just going to open it up to everyone for this last question, and we can close it out for the night. But just what can people do where they are right now? And we can start with Morgan.
I actually think there's so much to be doing. And, you know, if there's one positive of this very, very, very depressing and bad Corona time, it has cut out a lot of the noise of our lives that I think was serving to distract us from, you know, what really matters and a lot of the problems that were going on, and our own ability to act and focus our energy to act to solve them. So, you know, even those of us who are maybe stuck at home, you know, with get out the vote, there's text banking, there's talking to your family members to make sure they know to vote, you know, this whole vote tripling initiative. And then ultimately, and I think this is going to be really important just moving forward as a country, because it does feel like, and I'd be interested, you know, in what my fellow panelists think, it does feel like we are in the middle of a transition of sorts. I think, you know, we've had like this 40-year slumber, it seems almost, that has been dominated by a conservative agenda, and that we increasingly became disconnected from politics. And now, you know, like Marcella was referencing, I mean, 2016 woke a lot of people up, and I don't think that that has stopped. And then the protests happened this spring, and that accelerated an awakening for people who maybe 2016 didn't fully wake them up, or they weren't aware of, you know, Black issues specifically. And so as we look to build whatever the next phase of our country is going to be, I do hope that, you know, this space and time has given us a chance to connect, to develop more empathy that will ultimately drive our policy and political decisions, and to treat us all, each other, more humanely. So that's one of my hopes, and I think everyone can be a part of that empathy building process that's going to be the foundation for the larger societal change that we hope to see.
Thank you, Morgan. Julie.
Well, let's see. Yes, like Morgan said, there are a lot of things to be done and that people could do. I think that by having conversations with our neighbors, our friends, our family, what we have found, we've been engaging, I'd mentioned our door-to-door canvassing. We've engaged in that in urban areas in Wichita, Oklahoma City, and Kansas City, but also in rural areas, the small towns, where at first canvassers said, are you sure you want us to go there? And, you know, and there was some trepidation because of, you know, I think the way that rural America is viewed. So people went there nonetheless. We had targeted doors. Canvassers had meaningful conversations with constituents on the doorstep. People were sharing their abortion stories, stories of their children, maybe their sisters, that they had never shared before. So it really worked to, you know, break down that barrier and to put people face to face with each other who have these common values. And to also say to these constituents, especially in these more rural areas, that you're not alone. There are other people in this community who believe what you believe. And so to give people that support. So I think that these conversations are important. Also, there's a lot of fear. And so I think that it can help people's level of fear, that intensity that sometimes we see, you know, help to diffuse that a bit and lessen that fear. So that's one thing that I would recommend, is those conversations are highly important.
Thank you, Julie. That's really important. We'll go to Karen next.
Thank you. And I'm going to pick up on the conversation that you and Marcella were having about Rhode Island and say that we need more women, more people of color, and more folks from our communities writ large to represent us in the state legislatures. That is where, particularly around abortion rights and so many other issues, state policy is where it's at. I was a state legislator. I did actually have a baby while I was in the legislature. So don't rule these things out. You can do it any way you want. And I was in fact the president of Emerge America for a spell. So I would say Emerge, She the People, Higher Heights, New American Leaders, engage in those programs where they exist in your state and really help to lift up new voices, and let's bring those people that we have been organizing with to power and to sort of pass that baton. I think that's really important, and I didn't want to let that go because I think you're right, and we're seeing a better focus on embracing progressive issues by having a more diverse coalition across the legislatures. And you know, that is we're a purplish state, but we do have, we look like a blue state here in Colorado. But I would say on the coast, you have blue states that have been kind of tired and stuck, right? No term limits, people sit for a long time, they're not doing everything they can do. It's time to break through that. And you only need to look at the Supreme Court hearings to say it's not just state politics, but we also need people running for Congress. So I do think that engaging politically is key. And then get out of your comfort zone and do the work. Are you volunteering in a space that you're not normally volunteering in? Are you able to donate, whether that's in a nonprofit or political way? I just think everyone has to do just a tiny bit more right now in order to engage. And I know I've done more in my free time than I normally do in order to try to create the change I want to see. So I just wanted to pick up on that, and running for Congress and hanging around the Capitol and pushing folks to run. I think those are all great. And I would say more of that.
Thank you. And last but not least, Marcella.
Thank you. I think I similarly to Karen, I want to mention, I think making sure that we are encouraging people to vote in our local elections is a really big deal. Like we're talking, it's a national, a very global impact. However, I do think, at least here in Rhode Island, there are so many things that could be at stake, and that will connect to the things that are happening in a federal level. So I think making sure that people are voting for we have new mayors in towns. We have important questions, like we have so Rhode Island has a really bad name called Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. So that's a great name to have. This year we might vote to take that off our name. So I think encouraging people to really understand what that means, but even more importantly, I think, like I was saying earlier, connecting with even individuals who may not be able to vote. I think I come from a family of people who were undocumented for a long time, and this is my mom's first time ever voting. But she was always a great citizen, even if she wasn't a citizen. And so encouraging people to be participant in their democracy in whatever way that means. I think protesting is amazing. I think it's a thing that, I came from a country where you couldn't do that. And so being in a country where you can, we need to do it as much as we can. I think as you were mentioning, making sure that we're donating, participating even in nonprofits that can support good causes is really important. And I think all of that is what needs to happen no matter what.
Thank you, Marcella. And that wraps it up for tonight. Thank you to our speakers, Morgan, Marcella, Julie, and Karen, for such a great conversation. It's been great to be here with all of you. We really appreciate your insight and your expertise. Thank you to the Womxn Project for the great work that they continue to do and bringing us all together. I hope everyone stays safe and healthy through this election season. And as Marcella mentioned, if you are eligible and haven't done so already, go vote by mail, go vote early, or go vote on Election Day on November 3rd. But that's it for tonight. And thank you again, everyone, for being a part of this. Good night.